I woke up one morning to a letter pinned to my apartment door, accusing me of something absurd, hosting loud, raging parties into the wee hours. I stood there, bewildered, staring at the accusation, knowing full well that my social life revolved more around Netflix marathons than any sort of raucous gathering. This was the third complaint in a month, and while I had shrugged off the first two as simple misunderstandings, this seemed like a ridiculous escalation. Someone in my building was out to get me, and I was determined to find out who and why. Living in a cozy building nestled in the heart of Chicago, I thought I had found the perfect blend of community and privacy. The building had a quaint charm, with ivy crawling up the brick facade and a communal garden where residents mingled on weekends. I had moved in a year ago, drawn by both the picturesque setting and the friendly neighbors, like Julie from 3 doors down who always had a smile, and Mr. Thompson, the retired teacher next door with endless stories about his travels. The building had its eccentricities, like Mrs. Grady on the 5th floor who fed the neighborhood stray cats, or Sam, the building's self-appointed handyman, who was always tinkering with something. Despite these quirks, life here felt like a peaceful escape from the chaotic pace of city life. I had built friendships and enjoyed the occasional potluck dinners with neighbors. Trust and camaraderie seemed abundant, making the mystery of these false complaints all the more disconcerting. The first few complaints I received were baffling but relatively minor. Claims about music too loud or trash improperly disposed of. I had initially brushed them off, thinking they were errors or misdirected annoyance. However, as they increased in frequency and severity, the sense of unease grew. I noticed odd looks from neighbors in the hallway and fewer friendly greetings. Conversations seemed to hush as I entered common spaces, and I found myself feeling increasingly isolated in what had once felt like a vibrant community. One evening, as I was heading out to grab dinner, I overheard a snippet of conversation in the stairwell. Two residents were discussing the guy who couldn't keep his act together, and I realized with a jolt they were talking about me. It dawned on me that these complaints were not just nuisances, they were shaping how others viewed me. I felt a chilling sense of paranoia. Who was doing this to me, and what was their endgame? The turning point came when a particularly darn note arrived, citing that I was illegally subletting my apartment. I was called in for a meeting with the building management, who warned me of the potential consequences, including eviction if the allegations proved true. The thought of losing my home over baseless accusations infuriated me, and I knew I couldn't just sit back and let this continue. This was no longer just an inconvenience. It was a threat to my life here, a life I had meticulously built. Fueled by a mix of anger and determination, I decided it was time to fight back. I started by revisiting every complaint, noting dates and times, trying to find patterns or clues that could lead me to the culprit. I spent hours talking to neighbors, subtly probing, attempting to gather information without raising suspicions. It was a delicate balance. I needed to appear nonchalant while my mind was racing with questions and suspicions. I invested in a small security camera, discreetly installed in my hallway, hoping to catch whoever was leaving the notes. I also started keeping a detailed diary of my daily routines, documenting where I was and when to disprove any further accusations. My evenings were consumed with reviewing footage, scrutinizing any movement outside my door. This was my own personal stakeout, and I knew it required patience and meticulous attention to detail. Weeks passed, and just when frustration was starting to creep in, the camera captured something, an unfamiliar figure hanging around my door. It was a tall man, dressed inconspicuously, but his behavior was suspicious. He paused at my door, looked around nervously, and then slipped something under the mat. I didn't recognize him as a resident, which only heightened my curiosity. Who was this stranger, and what was his connection to me? The next step in my plan was to identify this mysterious man. I discussed my findings with Sam, the handyman, under the guise of idle curiosity about security. Sam, always eager to help, mentioned seeing a similar-looking man hanging around Mrs. Grady's apartment. That was my first real lead, and I latched onto it. I decided to approach Mrs. Grady, hoping she might offer some insight. Our conversation was enlightening. Mrs. Grady mentioned her nephew, Carl, who had been visiting her frequently. I pieced together that Carl had some unresolved issues with residents in the past, involving petty disputes over trivial matters, like leaving doors ajar in common spaces. It became increasingly clear that Carl might be behind the complaints, possibly as some misguided attempt to protect his aunt or assert control. Armed with this knowledge, I approached building management with the footage and my suspicions. I requested a formal investigation, emphasizing the baseless nature of the complaints and the potential for a personal vendetta. They agreed to look into it, and I felt a rush of relief. My plan was unfolding, and soon the truth would be exposed. The management's inquiry uncovered even more than I had expected. Carl, it turned out, had a history of causing trouble in various buildings his aunt had lived in, often leaving a trail of discord and discomfort. They found evidence that he had been using Mrs. Grady's access to snoop around the building and had likely orchestrated similar schemes before. The depth of his deceit was staggering. The moment of truth arrived during a building-wide meeting called by management. They presented their findings, highlighting Carl's actions and the undue stress and damage it had caused. Mrs. Grady was mortified and apologized profusely, having been unaware of her nephew's antics. Carl, who had been present, was publicly reprimanded, and it was made clear that he was no longer welcome in the building. The aftermath was surprisingly swift. Carl was banned from visiting, and Mrs. Grady, though upset, understood the necessity. The management issued a formal apology to me, clearing my name of all the false allegations. Neighbors who had been distant came forward, offering apologies and sharing their own relief at the resolution. It was as if a weight had been lifted from the entire community. With the truth out, the atmosphere in the building shifted back to what it had been, warm and inviting. I found myself rekindling connections with neighbors, joining in gatherings once more, and feeling the sense of belonging that had initially drawn me here. The relief was immense, but so was the satisfaction of having stood up for myself and exposed the truth without compromising my integrity. Looking back on the ordeal, I realized that it had taught me more than just the value of vigilance. It had reinforced the importance of standing up for oneself and seeking justice through calm, calculated means. I had faced an adversary I hadn't anticipated, but in doing so, I discovered strength and resilience I hadn't known I possessed. Now, as I stand on my balcony overlooking the bustling city, I feel an overwhelming sense of triumph. My life is back on track,